Pennsylvania, autumn of 1920. The season approached quietly that year, as if nature itself tried not to disturb the stillness of the countryside. Each morning, a pale mist rolled slowly over the open fields, curling around wooden fences and creeping along the narrow dirt road that led to the Barrett's farmhouse. The maples near the porch had already turned deep red, and the barn stood half-shadowed in the soft gold of the early sun. Life here moved at a measured, predictable pace, until the letter arrived. The Barrett family lived modestly. John Barrett, a sturdy man with calm gray eyes, worked the land with the patience of someone who had long accepted the burdens of rural life. His wife, Martha, kept the house warm and orderly, her days filled with baking, sewing, and watching the seasons drift past like old familiar friends. And there was Eli, 21 years old, tall, quiet, with the reserved manner of someone who grew up learning to hide more than he revealed. He was not Martha's biological son, but she had raised him as her own since he was a small boy. The family never tried to replace his past with promises or explanations. They simply loved him, and that was enough. One chilly afternoon, as Martha prepared supper, the mailman stopped by the fence and waved an envelope. "For you, Mrs. Barrett," he called, and she hurried out, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the handwriting on the front, her breath caught. It was from Eleanor, her older sister, the one who had lived an entire life on the road, traveling through cities, working in libraries, teaching in small schools scattered across the East Coast, always moving, always searching for something she never explained. At 56, Eleanor had never married, though many had tried to court her. She lived by her own mind and expectations, and she carried herself with the dignified independence of a woman who owed explanations to no one. Martha read the letter twice before calling John and Eli to the table. Eleanor wrote that she wished to stay with them for a year. Time to rest. Time to gather her thoughts. Time to feel rooted again. She was tired, she confessed. Tired in a way that travel could no longer cure. John scratched his chin thoughtfully. "It will be good to have her here," he said. "This house could use more laughter." Martha smiled softly. "It has been too long." Eli simply nodded, though curiosity stirred quietly within him. He had met Eleanor only once, when he was younger, and his memories were vague. A warm hand on his shoulder, a kind voice, a calm smile. But even that faint recollection carried something gentle, something steady. The day of her arrival came with the sound of wheels crunching over dry leaves. Eli, who had been chopping wood behind the barn, wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped toward the road. A dark green carriage approached, and inside sat a woman wrapped in a long gray coat, her silver-streaked hair pinned neatly beneath a hat. When she stepped down, her presence filled the yard like sudden sunlight. "Eleanor!" Martha exclaimed, rushing to embrace her. The sisters held each other for a long time, till lives momentarily crossing after years spent apart. John greeted her with a gentleman's nod. "Welcome home." Then her eyes fell on Eli. "My, how you've grown," she said softly. "You were just a boy last time I saw you." Eli felt strangely shy under her gaze. "It's good to see you again, Mom." "Oh, please," she laughed gently. "Call me Eleanor. I am no stranger here." Inside the house, her rival brought warmth and knows the way spring brings birds. She brought little gifts, a book for John, a silk ribbon for Martha, a small polished compass for Eli. "For your pocket," she said, "so you always know where you're going." Eli didn't know why her words struck him so deeply, but something in her manner, the softness of her voice, the calm intelligence in her eyes, unsettled him in a quiet, unfamiliar way. That evening they sat around the dinner table, sharing stories, laughter, memories. Eleanor spoke about her travels, the strange towns she had passed through, the people she had helped, the libraries where she had worked. Her voice carried warmth, wisdom, and a quiet sorrow she did not try to hide. And Eli listened. As the lantern glowed softly and the night wind brushed the windows, something subtle and wordless settled between them. The beginning of a connection neither understood yet, but both felt. Autumn deepened slowly, turning the hills copper and the air crisp enough that each breath felt like a sip of something cold and clean. Days in the Barrett household settled into a gentle rhythm with Eleanor now living under their roof. She moved through the rooms with a quiet grace, her footsteps soft, her voice warm, and the house, once so ordinary in its stillness, now felt alive in a different way. Eli first noticed the change in himself on one of those cool mornings, when he was repairing the fence near the orchard. He heard her before he saw her, the soft crunch of leaves under her shoes, the faint rustle of her lawn woolen coat. When he turned, she was standing a few yards away, watching him with a thoughtful expression, her hands folded in front of her. "You work with such care," she said. "Your father must be proud." Eli gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I just try to keep things in order." Eleanor stepped closer, kneeling beside the broken post. "May I?" she asked, and without waiting for an answer, she touched the wood, examining the grain. Her fingers, though older, were steady and sure. "You see," she continued, "this part splintered because the sole shifted, not because of anything you did wrong." He glanced at her, surprised by how natural it felt to have her beside him. She smelled faintly of lavender soap and old paper, a scent that reminded him of calm evenings and quiet thoughts. "You know a lot about things," he said, and she gave a small laugh. "About books, yes. About people perhaps less than I pretend." There was something in her tone, gentle, honest, that made Eli straighten his back and truly look at her. The early sunlight touched her face, softening the lines around her eyes, making her silver hair shine like frost. She looked strong, wise, and impossibly kind. He didn't understand the warmth rising in his chest. He only knew that he wanted her to stay beside him a little longer. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. Eleanor would wander out to the barn and ask about his work, or sit with him on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in a shawl, listening to the distant calls of night birds. Eli spoke more to her than he had to anyone in years. About the farm, about his dreams, about the sense of restlessness he sometimes felt but couldn't explain. Eleanor listened with a quiet attentiveness that was rare, almost disarming. She never rushed him, never laughed at his uncertainties. She asked thoughtful questions, offered gentle reflections, and with each conversation, Eli found himself wanting to share more. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the sky glow orange and rose. A cool breeze rustled through the fields, carrying the distant smell of hay. "You have a good heart, Eli," Eleanor said softly. "People see your strength, but they miss your gentleness." He felt her words settle inside him like a warm ember. "I'm not sure I deserve such kindness." "You do," she replied. "Kindness is something we choose to give, not something someone must earn." A long silence followed, but it was a peaceful one. Eli felt the weight of her presence beside him, comforting, steady, unmistakably important. When she turned her head and smiled, something quiet and fragile shifted between them, though neither dared name it. Inside the house, John and Martha noticed their closeness. Martha saw the way Eleanor's expression softened when Eli entered the room, and how his voice grew calmer when he spoke to her. But she assumed it was simply mutual respect, the natural bond between an intelligent older woman and a young man hungry for guidance. Eli, meanwhile, tried to understand what he was feeling. He had known affection before. Mild, fleeting, uncertain, but nothing like this. This was deeper, quieter, and strangely safe. He admired her mind, her strength, her steady kindness. He found himself wanting to protect her, to comfort her, to be near her without reason. Eleanor felt the shift too. At night, sitting by the window with a book open in her lap, she would catch herself thinking about his voice, the earnestness in his eyes, the way he listened as if every word mattered. She knew the age between them was vast, a mountain the world would never let them climb without judgment. And yet, when she thought of him, she felt something she had forgotten she was capable of, a warmth not of youth, but of being truly seen. Neither of them spoke their feelings aloud. Neither dared to cross that fragile line. And yet, in every shared glance, every quiet conversation, every lingering moment on the porch, their connection grew, steady, patient, undeniable. They did nothing forbidden. But the world within them had already begun to change. Winter crept into Pennsylvania gradually, softening the landscape under a thin veil of frost. The mornings became quieter, the earth firmer beneath the boots, and the sky carried a pale, muted glow that never fully warmed a day. Smoke curled steadily from the Barrett's chimney, drifting into the still air like slow-moving ghosts. Inside the farmhouse, life continued in calm routines, but beneath that calm, something unspoken had begun to take shape. By the time December settled in, the connection between Eli and Eleanor had grown into something they could no longer dismiss as friendship. It lived in the way their conversations stretched late into the evenings, long after the lamps were blown out. It lived in the gentle pauses between their words, in the tenderness of their shared silences. Something warm, something fragile, something real. One afternoon, when the snow had just begun to fall in delicate flakes, Eli found Eleanor in the kitchen, standing near the stove with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked tired, her shoulders slightly slumped, her gaze distant as though her mind wandered far from the room. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked. She turned slowly, offering him a faint smile. "Just thinking," she replied. "Winter makes the mind to quiet sometimes." He stepped closer, sensing the weight behind her words. There was a sadness about her that day, a quiet sorrow he had seen only in passing before. Something unspoken began to stir in him, an urge to shield her from whatever thoughts troubled her. They sat at the table, the room dim except for the glow from the kitchen lamp. Outside, snow drifted silently past the windows. After a long pause, Eleanor spoke. "Eli, I must tell you something I've been avoiding." His heart tightened, though he didn't know why. "What is it?" She lowered her gaze to her hands. "I won't be staying here forever. Martha doesn't know yet, but I had only planned to remain through spring. After that, I'll leave. I never intended to stay longer." The word struck him with the force of a sudden storm. He felt his breath hedge, felt something deep inside him lurch painfully. "Leave?" he echoed. "Why?" "Because it's the sensible thing," she said softly. "I've lived my life by moving forward. Staying here, staying anywhere, was never my way." And she hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. "And because I fear the longer I stay, the harder it will be for both of us to part." The meaning in her voice was unmistakable. Eli felt heat rush to his face, a raw mix of fear and hope and confusion. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "And what if I don't want you to leave?" Eleanor's eyes lifted to his, full of longing and pain all at once. "Eli, you are 21. Your life is just beginning." "Mine," she exhaled, searching for the right words. "Mine has already been lived. What grows between yous it shouldn't be, but it is," he whispered. The room seemed to hold its breath. The clock on the wall ticked softly, counting the seconds stretching between them. Eleanor shook her head slowly. "People would not understand. They would talk. They would judge. Your future could be ruined." He reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on hers. "I don't care what they say. I care about you. I care about us." His voice cracked with emotion he could no longer contain. "I've never felt this way about anyone. And you make me feel like I'm seen. Truly seen. For the first time in my life." A tear slid down Eleanor's cheek. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his touch steady her. "Eli, you don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," he said. "Stay. Stay with us. Stay with me." His voice softened, pleading. "We can make a life here. A quiet one. A good one." Silence fell again, heavy with everything she felt but couldn't say. Eleanor had spent her life making decisions alone, guided by reason and caution. But now, faced with the sincerity in Ella's eyes, the strength in his voice, she felt something inside her shift, something she thought had died long ago. "Finally," she whispered, "your words, they touch a place in me I thought was lost." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then don't go." Eleanor looked at him, her heart trembling under the weight of the moment. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that love does not belong to the young alone, nor to the old, nor to those the world deems appropriate. It belongs to those brave enough to embrace it. She breathed in slowly, her voice barely audible. "I will stay." At that moment, the snow outside thickened, falling in soft, endless waves, as if the world itself had paused to mark the beginning of a love that defied every expectation, yet felt more natural than anything either of them had ever known. Their future was uncertain. Their path would be difficult, but they had chosen it, together. Spring arrived hesitantly that year, brushing the frozen fields with shy strokes of green. The last traces of winter lingered in the hollows, and the mornings remained cold enough to miss Tellis' breath as he carried buckets of water from the well. But the air felt different, lighter, hopeful, as though the thaw had begun not only in the land, but in their lives. Eleanor, too, seemed changed. Ever since she had agreed to stay, something gentle blossomed within her. She moved through the house with a quiet brightness, humming softly as she swept the floors, lingering a little longer on the porch at dusk, as though savoring each passing moment. Yet beneath her calm surface, something restless stirred, a fatigue she tried to hide, a faint tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. Eli noticed. He noticed the way she paused to catch her breath when climbing the stairs, the way she pressed a hand to her waist with a puzzled expression, the way her appetite shifted, one day ravenous, the next almost absent. But he said nothing, afraid to burden her, afraid to disrupt the delicate peace blooming between them. One morning, when the sun finally broke through the clouds in a warm, golden haze, Eleanor announced that she needed to go into town. "Just a simple checkup," she said lightly, though her voice trembled at the edges. Martha insisted she not go alone, but Eleanor gently refused. "It'll be fine," she assured them. "It's only a routine visit." Eli watched her climb into the carriage, his heart tight with worry he did not fully understand. She gave him a reassuring smile, yet even in that smile, something uncertain shone through. The hours dragged. Martha baked bread to keep her hands busy. John repaired the chicken coop. Eli paced between the house and the barn, glancing repeatedly at the road as though willing the carriage to reappear. It was late afternoon when Eleanor finally returned. She stepped down slowly, almost cautiously, as though the ground beneath her felt unfamiliar. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, and when she lifted her gaze to Eli, a shadow of fear flickered in her eyes, a fear deeper than anything he had ever seen in her. He rushed to her side. "Eleanor, what happened? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak at first. She clutched the handle of the carriage door, steadying herself. Martha hurried out of the house, concern etched across her brow. "Eleanor, dear, you look faint. Did the doctor?" Eleanor raised a trembling hand, interrupting her. Then she looked directly at Eli, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I am with child." Silence swallowed everything. The chatter of sparrows, the wind brushing the fields, even the sound of John's footsteps behind them. The world seemed to narrow into a single fragile moment, as if time itself paused. Unsure of how to move forward, Martha gasped softly. John froze. But Eli stood utterly still, his breath gone, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear nothing else. Eleanor swallowed hard, fighting tears. "It should not be possible," she said, her voice breaking. "At my age the doctor was astonished. He asked me questions I could scarcely answer. He said miracles exist, but so do dangers. I do not know what to think, Eli. I do not know what this means for us." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands before they could fall to her sides. "It means," he said quietly, "that something extraordinary has happened. Something we must face together." Her eyes glistened with fear. "People will talk. They will condemn us." "Martha, John, I never meant to bring shame into this home." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, but she did not speak. John looked away, jaw clenched, absorbing the shock and heavy silence. Eli shook his head firmly. "I don't care about what people will say. I care about you. And the child." His voice softened. "Our child." Eleanor's breath caught, her shoulders trembling as relief and terror collided within her. Eli am frightened. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that steadied them both. "Then let me be strong for the both of us. Let me carry what you can't. Whatever comes, we face it together. This is our life now, not the world's." Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into him as if letting go of a burden she had carried alone for far too many years. For a moment, the fear eased, but around them, unspoken questions hung in the air. What would Martha say when the shock faded? Would John accept the truth or reject it? How long could they keep such a secret in a place where every whisper became a story? The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard. Their quiet love, once hidden in silent gazes and gentle conversations, was now bound to a future neither of them could predict. A future already beginning to tremble beneath the weight of what had been revealed. The days that followed felt heavier than any the Barrett household had known. Though the spring sun grew warmer and the fields shimmered with new life, a quiet tension settled over the farmhouse like an invisible veil. Eleanor tried to move through her routines with composure, but her steps were slower, her eyes dimmer, and her hands often trembled as she brushed crumbs from the table or folded linens by the window. The weight of the secret pressed upon her with every breath. Martha sensed something long before the truth emerged. She watched her sister with growing worry, how Eleanor paused to rest more often, how her face sometimes turned pale during the morning chores, how she clutched the back of a chair when dizziness overtook her. One afternoon, unable to contain her concern, Martha approached her. "Ellie," she said softly, "you haven't been yourself lately. You're hiding something from me." Eleanor froze. The sunlight streaming through the window fell across her face, revealing a fear she could no longer disguise. She set down the dish she was drying, her fingers trembling. For a moment she said nothing. "Martha," she whispered, "come outside with me, please." They walked quietly to the porch, where the afternoon breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs. They sat side by side, just as they had when they were children, leaning against each other during storms. But now Eleanor's shoulders were tight, her breath thin. "I don't know how to say this," she began, her voice cracking. "I don't know how to make it sound right." Martha reached over, taking her hand gently. "Just tell me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Eleanor's eyes filled, and she lowered her gaze. "Impregnant." The words hung in the air, like a bell struck in an empty church, soft, trembling, impossible to ignore. Martha stared at her, stunned into stillness. The shock washed over her in waves, first disbelief, then confusion, then something deeper, more painful. She struggled for breath, as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. "Pregnant?" she whispered. "Ellie, how? At your age, how could?" Her voice broke. "From whom?" Eleanor's silence gave the answer before she spoke it aloud. Martha's eyes widened, horror and sorrow intertwining. "No," she breathed. "No. Ellie, not Eli. Tell me it isn't him." But Eleanor could not speak. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and uncontrollable. Martha rose from the bench, pacing the porch as her hands shook. "He is like a son to us. John loves him as his own. Eli has family. You and he, Ellie. How could something like this happen without a word?" Eleanor bowed her head. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't meant to happen. We tried to be careful, tried to be proper. But feelings grew, and before I understood how deep they were, it was too late." Martha sank back beside her, torn between anguish and compassion. "You should have told us. We could have helped, prepared. Instead we're blindsided." Eleanor wiped her tears. "I was afraid. Of your judgment. Of hurting you. Of losing your love. But I couldn't hide it anymore." Just then, John stepped onto the porch, sensing the gravity in the air. He looked from one sister to the other, his brow furrowing. "What's happened?" Eleanor turned toward him with trembling lips. "John, I am carrying a child. Ella's child." John stood motionless, his face drained of color, his hands curled slowly into fists, not of anger, but of sheer disbelief. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to piece his thoughts into words. He stepped back, turning his gaze toward the yard, as though hoping the open sky might offer answers. No one spoke. The only sound was the distant rustle of wind through budding branches. At last, Marta whispered, "We need time, all of us. Time to understand this. Time to breathe." John nodded stiffly, unable to look either woman in the eye. For the next 2 days, the house existed in near silence. Meals were eaten quietly. Conversations were short, cautious. Even Eli felt the shift without knowing the cause. He watched Martha's red-rimmed eyes and John's distant expression, and fear crept into his chest. When the truth finally reached him, Eleanor calling him into the parlor, her voice trembling, Eli braced himself for the storm. But the storm did not come. There was no shouting, no accusations, only a deep, trembling shock. John cleared his throat, speaking with effort. "Eli, you should have trusted us, both of you." Eli bowed his head. "I didn't want to shame this family. I love her. I love our child." Martha wiped her cheeks. "Love makes fools of the best of us, but we will not let this family break apart." And in those words, fragile as they were, a small, trembling hope began to form. Even in the face of disbelief, sorrow, and fear, they were still a family. The tension in the house did not vanish overnight. It lingered in the quiet corners, in the hushed footsteps, in the way Martha paused at the doorway before entering a room where Eleanor sat. Yet the Barretts were not a family of shouting or chaos. Their way of dealing with heartbreak had always been silence first, reflection second, and then the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. A week passed before anyone dared to call a family meeting. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth after a light rain. Martha prepared supper with trembling hands, and though the meal was simple roast chicken, boiled potatoes, warm biscuits, no one seemed hungry. The table felt smaller than usual, as though the weight of what needed to be said pressed the walls inward. Eli sat rigidly, barely touching his food. Eleanor kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered, fear and shame tightening her chest. John looked older than he had in years, the lines on his face deepened by worry. The first words came from Eli. His voice was soft but steady. "We didn't mean for things to happen this way," he said. "But I won't deny what's true. I love her. I love our child, and I intend to stand by them." John exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "This isn't just about love, Eli," he said, his tone heavy. "It's about the world we live in. Pennsylvania isn't a place where people take kindly to anything uncommon. Eleanor lifted her head, her voice trembling. If anyone must bear blame, it should be me. I should have left before feelings grew. I should have. No, Eli cut in gently. Don't say that. None of this is your burden alone. That John's words, though spoken calmly, carried painful truth. If the neighbors find out, if the church finds out, people will talk. They'll judge. They'll turn their backs. And once a community decides someone is welcome, life becomes very hard. Martha, who had been silent until then, finally looked up. Her eyes were red, but her expression was soft. Ellie, you are my sister, she said. Eli, you are like a son. This is not what I wanted for either of you, but love rarely follows rules. Eleanor swallowed back tears. Martha's voice, gentle, trembling, felt like a fragile lifeline. We have to think of the child, Martha continued. He deserves peace, safety, a place where he won't grow up hearing whispers that stain his life before it even begins. The room went quiet. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder. After a long moment, it was Eleanor who spoke the words that shaped their future. If staying here will bring trouble to your home, then we will not stay. I won't destroy the peace you've built. Eli turned to her sharply. No. We don't have to run from everything. We have a right to be a family. Eleanor met his gaze with a heartbreaking tenderness. I know your heart, Eli, that you don't know the cruelty people can hold. You haven't lived as long as I have. You haven't seen how unforgiving small towns can be. Martha reached for Eleanor's hand. You don't have to leave immediately, she said. Stay until the baby is born. We can help. We can protect you. But afterward, perhaps it is best to start fresh somewhere else. John nodded solemnly. There are towns where no one knows you. Places where people mind their own affairs. You could find work, build a home, raise your family without prying eyes. The idea settled over the room like a heavy, inevitable truth. Eli clenched his jaw. If you go, I go. I won't leave you two alone in the world. Eleanor moved her hand to his, squeezing gently. I never thought you would, she whispered. Though sorrow filled the room, something else flickered there as well, a fragile unity, a sense of direction in a world that had turned suddenly uncertain. John sighed and finally spoke with soft resignation. Then it settled. You'll stay through the birth. When the weather warms, you'll pack what you need and leave this place quietly. Eleanor nodded. Martha wiped her eyes. Ella's gaze burned with quiet determination. Their road would be difficult. Their choices would be judged harshly by many. But on that solemn evening, beneath the dim glow of the dining lamp, they made their decision not out of fear, but out of love. A love strong enough to uproot a life. A love brave enough to build a new one. Spring melted into summer with a slow, heavy warmth. The kind that made the air shimmer above the fields and filled the evenings with the steady hum of crickets. The Barrett farmhouse felt quieter in those months, as if holding its breath. Eleanor moved through the days with growing difficulty, one hand always resting protectively on her belly, her steps short and careful as the weight of new life pressed upon her. The glow of expectation softened her features, though fatigue often clouded her eyes. Eli never left her side for long. He learned to cook simple meals, to fetch water from the well, to mend clothes and clean the kitchen with clumsy, but earnest hands. When Eleanor's breath grew short or her legs trembled, he was there to guide her gently to a chair. He built a small cradle out of oak from the back grove, sanding it smooth late into the night. His calloused fingers, more familiar with fence posts and plows, moved with surprising tenderness. John and Martha watched quietly from a distance. Their shock had settled into something softer: concern, compassion, and an aching acceptance. Martha brewed herbal teas that eased Eleanor's nausea. John repaired the roof above the small room where Eli and Eleanor would sleep. After the baby's arrival, no one spoke about judgment or shame anymore. They were only trying to keep the fragile peace intact until the time came to say goodbye. As July approached, the heat became almost unbearable. The nights were thick with humidity, and the air clung to the skin like warm cloth. On the evening before the storm, the sky darkened unexpectedly, heavy clouds rolling in from the west like a slow-moving tide. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. It was just after sunset when Eleanor felt the first sharp pain. She had been sitting in the rocking chair, trying to sew a seam that refused to cooperate, when the needle slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. A breath of pain stole through her, tightening her body. She gripped the armrest. Eli, she whispered. He was across the room in an instant, dropping to his knees beside her. Is it time? She nodded, her breath shallow. I think so. Everything after that happened quickly. Martha called for the midwife from the neighboring farm, sending John hurrying into the storm-darkened night to fetch her. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters as thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began to fall in heavy drops, tapping against the windows like urgent fingers. Inside the house, lanterns were lit. The air thickened with tension. Eleanor's pain grew stronger, sharper, pulling her into waves that left her trembling. Eli held her hand through each one, whispering reassurances. Though fear churned fiercely inside him, she was 56. The doctor had warned them. The risk was great, but Eleanor's eyes, though strained, held a quiet determination. "I've lived through harder storms," she murmured. The midwife arrived soaked and breathless, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She wasted no time, ushering everyone into movement. "We must hurry," she said. "It's coming fast." Hours passed in a blur of thunder and cries, whispered prayers and damp cloths. The walls seemed to tremble with each strike of lightning. Eli felt helpless, watching the woman he loved fight a battle that no one could fight for her. Martha stayed close, dabbing Eleanor's forehead, whispering encouragements through her tears. Near midnight, just as the storm outside reached its loudest fury, a final cry filled the room, not of pain, but of new life. A baby's cry. "A son." The midwife lifted the newborn gently, wrapping him in a warm cloth before placing him in Eleanor's trembling arms. He was small, but strong, his breathing steady, his tiny fingers curling instinctively. Ella's breath caught in his throat. Tears blurred his vision as he leaned over them, his heart swelling with a feeling he had never known before, love deeper than anything he had imagined, fierce and overwhelming. Eleanor looked down at the baby, her face illuminated by the lantern's soft glow. Exhaustion softened her features, but her eyes shone with wonder. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Martha wiped her tears. John, standing quietly in the corner, nodded with a solemn, unexpected pride. Eli touched the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "Welcome to the world," he murmured. "Welcome home." The storm finally began to fade, leaving behind a calm, heavy silence. Inside the small farmhouse, a new chapter had begun, not one of fear or regret, but of fragile hope. A hope born in the middle of thunder, held in the arms of a woman who had dared to love beyond all expectation, and a young man who would protect that love with his life. They named him Thomas.